Hey guys, welcome back to Door Talk. We're excited to have Lori Greene with us again today. Lori, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And so today we're going to be talking about some of the 2021 code updates, and we're going to split this into probably two parts. But Lori, what do you have for us today on some of these updates?
So there have been quite a few important changes for the 2021 model codes. And, some people think, well, I don't need to know about those until my jurisdiction adopts the 2021 codes, which does make sense because there are some things that technically don't apply until the code is updated in that jurisdiction. But there are some things that change that are more like clarifications, and those are things that we can use today. So the two changes I'm going to talk about are a change that requires automatic operators on accessible public entrances, and then another one that's related to accessibility, which has to do with operable force of door hardware, and then a little bit about opening force.
Okay. And so I get we can start on the one with the automatic operators on public entrances. And so what? And you said so. This is just more of an update to an already existing code, or
Well, this particular one is one that wouldn't be required until the code is adopted in a particular project's jurisdiction.
okay.
When the building permit is issued, the applicable code that you have to follow will be on the building permit. And until that happens with this one, you wouldn't have to add automatic operators to these doors. But I am seeing some movement toward that. So it is kind of a best practice. I think we'll be seeing more of it even before it's technically required by code.
Okay.
So basically, in a nutshell, um, what happened here was the when you have a public entrance to a building, a certain number of the public entrances have to be accessible. And so it's the rule of thumb is 60%, but then there are some other locations that also have to be accessible beyond the 60%. So you have to identify which areas of the building, which entrances to the building are required to be accessible, which ones are public entrances. Public entrances are defined as an entrance that is not a service entrance or a restricted entrance. So you can kind of figure out which entrances are considered public, from there which are accessible. And in the past, the model codes and the accessibility standards didn't have any particular locations where automatic operators were required. So a lot of times we used them if a door couldn't meet the requirements for a manual door, we would change it to an automatic door, and then some things went away, like the maneuvering clearance is different. You don't have to worry about the opening force as much and things like that. So they solved problems, but there was nothing in the codes that said in these locations you need them. So this is a pretty big change that, like I said, will come into play when the 2021 edition has been adopted. This is the 2021 IBC, or International Building Code. And it doesn't apply to every building. It applies to public entrances in most assembly occupancies, everything except A5, with an occupant load of more than 300 people, and then to business, mercantile, and R1 residential occupancies with an occupant load of greater than 500 people. And there were some changes in the accessibility standard, A1 17.1, that kind of made me think that this was going to happen. Change was going to come about. And it's for each public entrance required to be accessible, you have to have one door or one set of doors with an automatic operator. So if it's a vestibule situation, you would have your exterior and then your vestibule would have an operator. They can be low energy operators, they can be full power pedestrian doors, either one is acceptable.
And so, could you give like an example of maybe a situation that would call for this?
Sure. um, well, I was thinking maybe we could talk about the different types of buildings
Yeah, that'd be
that
great.
that might require. Yeah. So, like I said, almost every assembly occupancy needs to meet this requirement, except for A5. So we have A1, A2, A3, and A4, and those are all different types of assembly occupancies, including including restaurants, recreation, churches, transportation, um, bowling alleys, all of those things, dance halls. And the one that doesn't require it is A5, and that is basically like a football stadium, outdoor sporting events kind of places. And generally in those, the doors are either open or they're closed. So it's not like people are pushing the button to come into the stadium or something like that. So that one is exempt. So any of those assembly occupancies, if the occupant load is more than 300 people, it's going to have to comply with this change. And then business. So business would be like an office building, lots of different types of businesses, dentist's office, doctor's office, those kinds of things. They wouldn't individually need their own operator, but they are examples of business occupancy. So if you had like a medical office building, for example, or any other type of office building, um, those would have to comply if the occupant load was over 500. And then the same with mercantile, which those are stores, basically retail stores, and R1 residential occupancies. So those are hotels. So any of those examples, if there's an occupant load of over 500, in that building, they would have to comply with this change.
And you were saying that this change is not taking effect everywhere. It should have to still be put into effect in your local area.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
And I know you were saying that it's best practice. So I mean, it may be good for you to go ahead and be thinking about these things and what you're doing now, so you can be ahead of the curve for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, one thing that we can really do in the industry to make ourselves important to our customers, whatever type of customers we're serving, is to know what's coming. So we can always say, hey, you know, I'm working on this specification for you. This change is coming. Is this something that you want me to incorporate into this project? So,
And yeah, it's always best for us to be able to help our customers, and especially say, hey, this is coming down the pipeline, and we want to try and help you be ahead of it. So that's always great to know. And so, Lori, now we also said that there's the operable force hardware. There's also an update for that.
yes, so this is a little bit of a confusing area because there are some conflicts between the different codes and standards. So, what happened originally was when the 2010 ADA was published, there was a change made that required operable hardware to operate with 5 pounds of force or less. And that change was made as an editorial change. It didn't go through the normal process. So, there was a lot of confusion originally because in general, there were no limitations on how much force it took to turn a lever, for example. There were limitations for panic hardware, but it was 15 pounds of force, not 5. So all of a sudden, we had these conflicts between the codes. We had to quickly develop products that would meet the ADA requirements. So it was a little bit of a crazy time trying to figure out what we needed to do to address this code change because it just came out of nowhere because it was made as an editorial change. We kind of didn't know that it was happening. So the accessibility standard that's referenced by the IBC is ICC A117.1. And when the ADA was changed, A117.1 didn't have a requirement for operable hardware, how much force it took to operate. So when the 2017 edition of that standard came out, it added a requirement for hardware that operates with a pushing or pulling motion, like panic hardware, that has to operate with 15 pounds of force. And with hardware that operates with a rotational motion, it's 28 inch-pounds of force. So that was added to the accessibility standard. And then in the 2021 IBC, it was brought into the actual IBC. So it gets us a little bit closer to, what is the intent of the codes, but we still have that conflict between the ADA still requires 5 pounds. The IBC and A117.1 require 15 pounds for pushing or pulling and then 28 inch-pounds for rotational. So at some point, someone has to come to some agreement here because this is quite a major conflict. I think that what could happen is that when the ADA is eventually revised, um, it could change to be aligned with what the IBC and the other accessibility standard requires. Because I say that because during the process where these changes were being made in the model codes and the other accessibility standard, the people from the US Access Board didn't raise any objections to it. They didn't say, hey, that conflicts with what we have. So, what I really want is just something that's aligned,
Yes.
one way or the other. And I think that we're heading toward that.
And now, California, they have 5 pounds on their panic devices as well, because I know certain manufacturers have to make special exit devices just for them to meet that requirement. I guess that was maybe they adopted that from the ADA regulations. They took that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that's exactly right. They're one of the few states that actually takes the ADA standards and makes them part of their building code, and that is their accessibility standard in California and in a couple other locations. But most states use the
Yeah.
IBC and the accessibility standard that's referenced by the IBC. So you could actually have a problem the way it is now. You could have a problem where you build something to the 2021 IBC, your panic hardware operates with 15 pounds of force, and someone comes in after the fact and files a lawsuit because you don't have hardware that operates with 5 pounds of force, since the ADA applies nationwide. So, it is a little bit of a problem still, but hopefully we're taking baby steps toward some sort of resolution to it.
For sure. And I mean, I think we all know how important the ADA is. I mean, it's a very important thing to have, and definitely being able to have that aligned with the IBC is going to be very beneficial if we can get to that point, because it's very difficult when you're looking at things. You go, well, this says this, and we go by this, but then this also, it can make things very difficult, and it does make things difficult sometimes, especially when you have a customer or somebody that asks the question. You have to show them two different things and say, well, I mean, we can do this, but if you want to meet ADA, and it does confuse things. And like you said, hopefully they're going to be able to come to some kind of resolution on that. And now with you guys, when y'all get together and talk about codes and everything and go over kind of just talk about the things that could change, is this the kind of stuff that gets brought up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with the BHMA Codes and Government Affairs Committee. And what we do, one of the things that we do is try to align the codes and standards so that we don't have these problems. It will never be perfect because there's also a time lag. So we might make a change to one thing and then it takes a while. For example, I don't know when the ADA is going to be updated again, when their standards will be updated. But we basically have a wish list. I have my own wish list. Everyone has their wish list. And we kind of compile those together and we decide which things are most important. Where can we be successful? We've been working on a lot of stuff for the 2024 codes, and that I'm really excited about because some things have already been approved. We know that the changes are going to be made, so I'll have some information coming up about that. But yes, we all get together, all of the different manufacturers. Anyone can actually make a proposal. Any organization or individual can make a proposal on their own, but we find that working together as a team with all of the different manufacturers, we can bring in what we're seeing in the field, or if there are like new technologies or something that the codes don't currently address. For example, when we talk about like filling holes in fire doors, for example, that was something that the codes, the standards or NFPA 80 didn't specifically allow. That didn't mean you couldn't do it, but it was a little bit harder to get permission to do
Yeah.
it. So, things like that, we're always looking at what's new, how do the codes have to change, and then how can we align them a little bit better to avoid that confusion in the field.
For sure. And well, Lori, thank you so much for your time again today. And we're going to continue on in the next part, in part two, for the rest of the code updates of 2021. And I'm looking forward to being able to hear about that. But guys, we'll see you on the next episode. And thanks again for watching.